Imagine you're at home. It's been raining, you're alone in the house, you're watching a movie, a scary movie. Just before something bad happens, there's always that soundtrack. And then you hear a knock on your door. What do? You're frozen, isn't you? Fear. Imagine living in that fear every day, and the cause of that fear being your dad. This is my story. I hear my dad drive out the driveway, and my heart would skip it. And not in excitement, but fear. And I didn't know why, but I would just be very fearful. So he'd walk into the door, and then the door would close, but not really close. Our door, you know whether you shut it or it just made a sound. So it didn't even add to the fear. And I just didn't want to be around my dad. And I never did anything wrong. It was just a fear. And my dad was one of those guys who he had a temper. He was temperamental. So that fear of you didn't know what kind of mood he'd be in when he got home from work. You just wanted to be away from him. And what happened is that I wanted to avoid being him. And this was quite easy. He was a workaholic. So he'd leave very early in the morning. At 6, he'd be gone. Come back late at night. We'd be asleep. And so we never got to see him much during the weekdays. But in the weekends, it was quite challenging because he'd come home at any time. Yeah, and it's not like I could go to a friend's house. He had a slogan that everything a child could need is under this roof. I want to go and visit my friend. Why? They can come here. I want to go for a sleepover. We have enough beds here. We want to go out for lunch with my friends. We have a chef. Ask for your choice of food. You really could not escape from him. So he was a very strict disciplinarian. And so with that, you just had to avoid him. I remember one day my older sister, she stood up to my dad. She wasn't happy with the way he was running some things, and she stood up to him. In our house, it was unheard of. That day, we were shaking. My dad was so livid. He was livid. But, and I just keep saying by God's grace, he stood down. We went to bed. And the next morning, he told my mom, Kumbe, I don't have daughters in this house. I have warriors. And just like that, the relationship changed. That respect for my dad, for him to recognize that he has warriors in his house, almost like a respectful thing. And in our family, my sister is here, my twin sister is there. And Priscilla, say hello. And so in our family, we are four girls first, and then they were much younger. So for him to say that really changed the relationship that we had, and I began to enjoy being around my dad. And most of the times on the weekends now, he'd come back with motura. Motura is the African sausage, and we'd sit under the tree with the family. We'd read stories, read for him the newspaper. A bond started forming even with the rest of us. And I remember one day he came home from work, and he sat on his bed and was really, really down. And those guys, the dads of those days, my dad was much older, they didn't show emotion. But he was so sad. He was so, so sad. So I asked him, Daddy, what's wrong? And he's like, so-and-so died. And this was a very good friend of his who lived in Thika, and he had been shot dead. And the first time, I almost saw my dad cry. I didn't think he wanted to see it. It was almost at the corner of his eye here. But he was really struggling to just compose himself. And for the first time, I think I'd known him, I saw him as a human person, as a human being with emotions. He can get hurt. He's not the lion we knew. So it really changed things from there. And we began to enter a relationship with him. And he began to instill a lot of his values in us. He didn't tolerate laziness or entitlement. And there's a time, my dad, if you asked anything about education, he'd give you the money. School fees, books, it's fine. So I asked for some money I think I wanted to go out with my friends or something. He told me, okay, just do this, just walk outside. Look at that tree. If you find money, collect all the money you can get. It's yours. And of course, there's no money at the tree. There's no money. So he made you have to strategize and negotiate and see, okay, how can I get these things done? But it really impacted us as his children. We learned a lot. And he said, this is my money. If you want your own money, you have to work for it. And I think my sister here can attest that we worked over the school holidays. He didn't care. I want to sleep in. Get up. So we'd go with him. So he had coffee farms, he had tea farms. He had a factory where they did the milled flour, and he used to supply to the Kenya Army. So we'd spend the day, so on weekends, we'd spend the day with him. He'd tell us, enter the car, let's go. We'd go to the coffee plantation, see him pay his workers, pick coffee. We'd be paid like the normal casual laborer that is there. Of course, we didn't work as hard. You'd be like, you walk around and come back. But he just instilled that this money is not, it's not for just giving. You have to see where the money comes from. I remember we'd spend a lot of time at the factory. It was in Pangani. And at the end of the day, we were packing flour. You know, and those days the machines are now very nice. It's a big needle like this, like, and at the end of the day, we'd be looking white, like Casper the ghost. And the same person you've worked in his factory the whole day would say, you're not entering my car, your mother. I'm like, okay. But it really made us instill the value of hard work and just not be entitled. And we did a lot of things for him. You'd be the messenger on one day, the tea girl on the next day, you'd write us, you'd be the secretary, you'd host the guests, read the newspapers. I said, there's nothing we couldn't do. I remember one thing my dad used to make us do is he would read, my dad, okay, now let me go back a bit. My dad was a standard 4 dropout. So he didn't know much English, but he'd read the paper and also Taifa Leo, because he'd now counter-check with Taifa Leo what Nation was saying was correct. So he'd make you read Nation. So he makes to him you read in English, translate to him in Kikuyu, right? He asks you a question in Kikuyu, translate back in English, and give it back to him. So you can imagine you are a translator. By that time, I could say I could apply for a job at the UN if they had Kikuyu as a language. But it just made you it made us very and very virtuous. And looking in hindsight, I didn't think to prepare us for the next stage of his life was when he got sick and he died. And I mean, I don't think I've spoken about it openly in such a forum, but this was about 12 years ago. I was 21 years old. And his death it broke me. One, I couldn't believe that all the things I'd promised him, I'd even told him, when I grow up and get money and I go to London, I'll buy you a shirt. You know, that was my dream, to buy him a shirt in London. And I know those things kept replaying back, especially even when I went to London, and I was like, I remember I was in the shop and I cried. I know those guys were like, are you buying or not? So I was like, no. So all those things that I promised him, I couldn't believe that he would not be there to see my kids. He'd not be there to walk me down the aisle. He would not be there to just even discuss about things. And I remember I got a job at the Star newspaper. And my dad loved newspapers. And I got home that day and I cried because I was like, I can't share this news with him. So, and even now, when you think about all those things happening, the moments I just go straight back to what we discussed, and I mean, the tears just come. So we bury my dad, and then, boop, hits the fan, literally. Things start to unravel. So my dad, as with any businesses, had taken out a couple of loans to do operational costs. But now with these things, what happened is with the interest rates and everything, so we are looking at a debt of $7 million. Do I repeat again? $7 million. In Kenyan shillings, that is 700 million shillings. You must remember now, my mom is a grieving widow. Our eldest at that time, so we are a polygamous family. I have a stepmom who's older. My mom is the second wife. But I'll just talk about our family. So at that time, my older sister was 22. She was the oldest. The youngest was my brother. I think he was 13. Right? So we had $7 million, right? Good. So we are like, okay, now. This particular bank that had this money, or money that we owed, was holding on to the titles of our house, where my dad was buried, of his businesses, of the farms, of literally everything that we knew Dad owned. We're together? Okay. So you can imagine, those days when you go to the bank, you have to dress up in the morning. It's like an event. Look for your best dress. This is a no makeup party, so you couldn't draw, but you had to be smart going to the bank. We used to go to the bank, and they were very shocked that we knew things that they didn't expect us to know. And you know how banks are these days. You have to be very knowledgeable about things that you take. You see that there's a lack of knowledge here, they will take the advantage. Now, many years back, like maybe 2 years back, before my dad was getting sick, the day he came home, he said, just have some things in the car. So we're off to the car, cartons of files. That same case now that has the money. And we'd sit, me, my sisters, we'd take turns because we were sleeping. So we'd sit down and we'd go through the files for that bank. And it'd say, when you find this date or you find this amount, mark it. So by the time we were going to the bank, we knew. Even at that tender age, we knew some of the things that were going on. One thing he taught me, and I'll always be grateful for it, he taught us something called the induplum rule. And my friend is here from the bank, Natalie. We can talk to her later. She can explain to you. So this rule, what it says is that the bank cannot recover money apart from the principal amount owed, right? That is what saved us. His loan was 100 million. 600 was interest. So we were able to go back to the bank and say, we're paying you the principal amount, and that's it. Take it or leave it, we go to court. But you see, where did that strength come from? My dad had taught us, had imparted that knowledge on us, right? And it really helped because the bank took the deal. We ended up selling a piece of property that was able to cover that loan, to pay off that loan and pay off other loans, and we were debt-free. But you see, this came from the knowledge that gave us, right? And it was such, up to this day, what I'll say is that it put a lot of our enemies at shame because when my dad passed away, there were so many people cheering us on to fail. You see so many families fighting over property, fighting over money, and they end up being like 20 years in court, and the money is frozen, right? But he gave us a spirit of just be diligent at what you do, right? He wanted us to have interest in his work. Not just give me, but know where this money is coming from and what its purpose is for. So that was good. So we pay that off. And then we continue, even every day, even as I go through my daily life, I see many aspects of my dad. And all I just want to say is that I just want to say thank you to him. Because without the values he instilled in us, we wouldn't be here today, right? That a humble heart is more valuable than anything. He might give you his last 1,000 shillings if it could help you. This is a person who didn't go to school, but he built an empire. He wanted us to have a better life than he did. We went to some of the best schools in the country. Not because he was told school is nice, but he knew that that's the only way he could make us have a life for ourselves. And for him, what I'm going to say is that I want to give my kids, my nieces there, and I really wish he had met Haruka, his legacy of growing up a poor boy from Dumberi, He came from having to bury his mom with a wheelbarrow. That's how that poor they are, to leaving for us a legacy, right? And I just want to say that for my kids, I just want them to know that they are because I am, because he was.